Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this fourth and last Q&A session on the TSI revision package. I'm Cyril Martin, Communication Officer, and I'm honored to be your moderator. As you know, the TSI revision package 2023 has come into effect on the 20th of September. To give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as possible, we have decided to organize 4 Q&A sessions, each focused on a specific theme. You can find the recordings and slides of the first 3 sessions on our website. As you know, today's session is dedicated to CCS. We have provided you with the option to send us your questions in advance, and of course, the chat is open to you throughout the duration of the sessions. We will do our best to address questions asked during the live session as well, but priority will be given to questions received in advance. To discuss today's topics, I'm pleased to welcome Juan Hernández Fernández and Georgios Kouparoussos, both being project officers in the ERTMS unit at ERA, and Nordin Boussouf, project officer in the rolling stock and fixed installations unit at ERA. I'm also very pleased to welcome my colleague João Gaspar. He will have the pleasure to relay your questions to our speakers today. A last word to say that, as we do every time, this Q&A session is being recorded and will be made available on our website later today. Without further ado, I now give the floor to you, João. Please.
Dear Cyril, many thanks for this and welcome to everyone and to our colleagues and members of the sector. We know that this is a very important webinar since we're talking about the CCS TSI, more specifically ERTMS, which raises a lot of questions. And do not worry, we will try to accommodate and answer as many questions as possible as we receive them in our inbox, but also if there is place to improve or even place to provide additional, we will come back to you possibly in additional sessions. But let's start with this one, and let's start with the most important questions that we received. Just to remind you that if a question that you have made is not specifically answered, that doesn't mean that we have not looked at it. It just means that we have grouped them and tried to give a general answer to everybody. I will start with the first set of questions. And next slide, please. So why does the CCS TSI doesn't specify any interoperability requirement for the interlockings, level crossings, and certain other elements of the CCS? So that's the very first question. The next one is about, is it possible to certify as an interoperability constituent an onboard unit which is capable of working only in level 0 and level 1? That's the second question. And the third question is, must Ethernet buses be mandatory for new vehicles? And is it possible by using a gateway converter, example an FMVB, to Ethernet to fulfill the requirement? These are very detailed questions, and in order to answer them, I will give the floor to my colleague Juan. Juan, can you please take the floor and give us a bit of an overview about this?
Thanks, João. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so I will deal with these 3 questions. So first, on the scope of the CCS TSI, we have to differentiate between, you can change the slide, between the scope of the directive and the scope of the CCS TSI. In the whereas of the Interoperability Directive, is it stated that the TSIs will define the optimal level of harmonization required. Also, the Interoperability Directive provides the definition of the different subsystems. So for CCS, you can find them in Annex 2. Then the CCS TSI only provides interoperability requirements for the Class A system. This is ETCS, RMR, the Railway Mobile Radio, which is so far composed of GSMR and FNMCS, ATO, and the trackside train detections. For other elements that are also in the scope of CCS, because the CCS are elements that are required to provide the safe operation of the trains, they are in the scope of the CCS subsystem, but we have provided no interoperability requirements for them because this is not needed to achieve the objectives. And then this is explicitly mentioned in the CCS TSI in the first chapter in a footnote where we say that interlockings, level crossings, and other elements are in the scope of CCS, but they are not. They have no requirements. So they are They are, of course, subject to the safety assessment of the overall railway system, but CCS does not provide specific requirements for them. Then going to the more specific questions about what is the scope of the onboard unit, then here it's important to distinguish two principles on the CCS TSI. The levels are mainly defined for the track side. So in point 2.3 of the CCS TSI, you find the definitions that is specifically mentioned track side levels. So there are options for infrastructure managers to define which level of functionality is expected from track side. But these optionalities are not given in the same way to the onboard units. For the onboard units, and in general, all the options inside the CCS TSI are defined in section 7 to 9. But here it's important to differentiate the capability of an onboard subsystem to operate on a level 2 or a level 3 lines for the ICS functionalities. So the ETCS onboard unit must be functionally complete, so it has to implement all defined functionalities, and what is optional is to provide the interface to the data communication part or to provide the train integrity monitoring system. But as the question was saying, there is not such a thing like a level 0 or level 1 on board. The ETCS onboard unit has to be functionally complete and implement all the elements defined. Regarding the other questions about the need for the Ethernet bus, there is a difference. We are in the transition period because the Ethernet bus has been recently introduced in this TSI. For existing vehicles, it might implement this solution with converter or adapters, but newly built interoperability constituents must implement the new Ethernet-based communication, even if they are not intended in the beginning to be interfaced with ATO of FNMCS, which are the main target system for this new interface based on Ethernet, on the Ethernet bus. So these are my answers to the questions, and then I give the floor back to you, Joao.
Many thanks, Juan. Very clear now. And I'll just proceed to the next questions, which is more practical. So it's for people that are actually installing it on the train. So is it possible to install a new type of Class B device in a train or in a vehicle, which is already implemented with another one? For example, the addition of a German PCB system in a vehicle previously equipped with, let's say, a Polish Class B system. And the next one is for the extension of area of use without any modification of the vehicle. Is it only that previous TSIs can still be applied according to table B1.1? Juan, can you please give me some clarification about this, please?
Yes, Joao. I think I will try to cover this. As all our audience may know, the new CCS TSI has included more strict requirements regarding the ETCS deployment. So previous exceptions has been removed, and now in more and more cases, the installation of ETCS or ERTMS in general is required on new vehicles. These two questions are specifically addressed to existing vehicles. So in one case, you have one vehicle that is only equipped with Class B systems, which are the former national train protection system. And then if you have one train that was equipped with in your example, in the question proposed, was with the German system, and then you plan to add another Class B system, then the TSI now requires that also the Class A interoperable system, the ETCS, is also installed. So this is recorded in point 7422 when a vehicle is equipped or is added with an additional Class B, then you have to install also ETCS. A slightly different case is if you have already a Class B system equipped, and then you have it replaced or renewed. So you keep the same functionality in the onboard, so you don't add new capabilities to this onboard. Then this does not fall under the consideration of upgrading. It's just renewal, and then therefore it won't be mandatory to equip ETCS. But in any case, it's highly recommended from our side that all vehicles are equipped with ETCS. The second question is about an existing vehicle that is already equipped with ETCS. And in this case, these vehicles want to extend the area of use. This means to start operating in a new network that usually also considered to start operating in another member state. This is covered by CCS TSI point 7423. And then it's clearly stated that in case the vehicle is already equipped with a version of ETCS, then it's not mandatory to upgrade it unless for reasons of technical compatibility. So if the vehicle is already equipped, then the installation can remain as long as it's compatible with the new network. One case of incompatibility, if you have a baseline 2 vehicle that is able to run on a baseline 2 and it wants to be operated in a new network where baseline 3 has been deployed, of course, this is incompatible and then the vehicle needs to be upgraded. But as long as the vehicle remain unchanged and remain compatible with the new area of use, there is no mandatory requirement from the CCS TSI to perform any kind of upgrade. So I hope this clarifies the question and I give the floor back to you, Joao.
Many thanks, very clear. And again, stay with me, Juan, because I would like to discuss with you the next two questions. And those are very practical questions. I think it's something that people have been asking for a while, and it concerns special vehicles. So when should special vehicles, OTMs, on-track machines, yellow vehicles, maintenance vehicles, when should they be equipped with ETCS? And following that, because of their own nature, because they're not vehicles in which the space between the wheels is always in the same place, about CMD, cold movement detection. So is this requirement also applicable to special vehicles, since the space available makes it difficult to implement this feature? And another one, can a derogation request be submitted for this type of vehicles/machines? Juan, please let me know what we can do with this.
Yes, Joao. I think special vehicles is one of the new targets of CCS TSI. In the past, used to be an exception of the equipment of these vehicles, but this has been refined in this new version of the CCS TSI. We need to go in order. So the first thing that we need to ask is about the scope. Is this kind of a special vehicle in the scope of the CCS TSI? This is clarified in the point 1.1, where it says that the special vehicles are in the scope of CCS TSI if they are equipped with a driving cab, if they are intended to be operated in running mode. This is to run through in between of the regular traffic, and they are running on its own wheels. So if the special vehicles meets these three conditions, then they are in the scope of the CCS TSI, and in principle, they should be equipped with ETCS. The CCS TSI also provides some flexibility to the member states under point 7432 to exclude the special vehicles under specific conditions. So member states can grant some exceptions for special vehicles as defined in this point. So, but then even if after these two conditions, the special vehicles are still required to be equipped, we know that they face specific technical constraints for the equipment. So in the transition regime in Appendix B, longer times has been provided for special vehicles, so the sector has more time to adapt to the new requirements. And in general, as the request from non-application of the TSIs, formerly known or commonly known as derogations, they are in the Interoperability Directive. So this remains always a possibility. And of course, this is also a possibility for special vehicles. So in case there are some technical or economical difficulties, then this request of non-application can be raised to the member state and to the European Commission to explain the reasons why it's not possible and not needed, while keeping the overall objectives of the Interoperability Directive. So that's my answer to these special vehicles, which is a difficult topic because there are, as you say, constraints. And for the cool movement detection, it's just to say that in principle, it is mandatory also for special vehicles since they are intended to run through the normal traffic. Okay, I give the floor back to you.
Many thanks, Juan, especially for the clarification about the TMs. And again, if further questions arise, we can always answer them later. Now I would like to change topic slightly and talk a little bit about the marriage between the TCS on board and the rolling stock, which is something that is new, and it's been raising a few questions as well. And I think that we really need to look at what was happening before. So what was the situation in the previous TSIs then? And what has actually changed in the TSI LOC&PAS 2023 to accommodate the TCS on board requirements, and what was changed in the TSI CCS as well. So how do those two fit together now? In order to answer this question, I will give the floor to my colleague Nordin, who can clarify a little bit. Nordin, please, can you give us an overview about these three very generic questions?
Yes, of course. So in this slide, we try to give an overview of what was the situation in previous TSI. And in fact, there was always interface between ETCS and rolling stock, and there was a work to clarify this interface, because we had, for example, in the LOC&PAS TSIs, only few parameters covering the interface with ETCS. They were limited to for example, doors, emergency brake command, running through section separation. And there were other interfaces that were not even identified in the LOC&PAS, like, for example, the service brake command. So there was a work to clarify and ensure the full identifications of the interface and also their specification end-to-end. Another problem was in relation to the role of the rolling stock NOBO and the CCS NOBO. It was not so clear. And we had also to clarify which interface is mandatory, which one can be optional, depending if it's a new design of rolling stock or if it applies to an existing design, and also depending on the characteristic of the vehicle. And the last point, we never had any predisposition requirements in new rolling stock to anticipate the future installation of a TCS. So when there was a new rolling stock placed in service without a TCS on board, as soon as you had to install an TCS, it was a lot of modification to the rolling stock. Next slide, please. So this work generate some changes in the LOC&PAS and also clarification. So we have now in the chapter 4 for new parameters, new requirements and amended ones. So all the applicable requirements to the rolling stock when ETCS is installed are defined in specific parameters of the chapter 4. They refer to main functions that ETCS needs, like managing the brake, service or emergency brake command, knowing the status of the special brake like magnetic track brake, eddy current brake, exchanges between ETCS where ETCS act as a postman, sending to the rolling stock the characteristic of the infrastructure to facilitate the running through section separation or lowering the pantograph. And there was also information that ETCS needs to know to manage some ETCS mode. So we have added in the rolling stock TSI some requirements to make the link to the ETCS. And to give these clarifications, we have now in the appendix of the LOC&PAS TSI an appendix G2 index B that refers to the subset 34. The subset 34 is the train interface function that defined all the train interface between the TCS and rolling stock. So we give all the detailed requirements to which the rolling stock shall comply with. And in addition, we clarified the role of the rolling stock and rolling stock notify body versus the CCS notify body in the chapter 6 to 10, where we indicated clearly at which stage a NOBO will make an assessment. So the rolling stock function in relation to the interface with the TCS can only be assessed when a TCS is installed. And this assessment is under the responsibility, of course, of the applicant and checks under the responsibility of the CCS NOBO. And there are other requirements that are still applicable to the rolling stock, especially after receiving some comments from a TCS in regards, for example, running through section separation. This rolling stock actions is assessed by rolling stock NOBO. Can you go to the next slide, please? And there is also a new chapter that is totally new in the LOC&PAS, and it is about the predisposition requirement. The idea here is to tackle the problematic of having new rolling stock placed in service. And when you have to install a TCS 1 year or 2 years after, that suddenly you face a lot of problems. There is no space available for a TCS equipment. There is no the functionality, the TCMS, for example, needs to be revised. So what we have now in the LOC&PAS, a specific chapter 715, applicable to new design rolling stock that require that this new design shall comply with the requirements of the train interface function, the information of which train interface functions have been implemented, and also the protocol of communication between a TCS and rolling stock shall be documented, and part of the technical documentation, the technical file compiled by the applicant, and space shall be made available for future installation of a TCS, including the antenna, position of DMIs, etc. And also the conditions for installation must be documented. And here we also clarified what is the rolling stock notified body role. So here the NOBO will simply check that there is the set of documentations that are provided. And the checks will be performed only when we have a TCS finally installed. Next slide, please. So I've just explained what was changed in the LOC&PAS TSI, and there was also some amendment in the CCS TSIs in relation to the interface between rolling stock and the TCS. So here we have in the point 422, we still have the reference to the subset 34, I just explained, and we have introduced for the newly designed vehicle mandatory subset. There is the subset 119 that provides the physical implementation of the interface. So CCS on board and rolling stock shall comply with these subsets. And there is also the subset 120 that relates to the safety analysis of the interface. And in addition, we have introduced a new chapter in the subset 34, the chapter 3, that give the full conditions applicable to the train interface function by the rolling stock. So we have a table there that provides information on which functions apply to newly developed vehicle and which apply to other vehicles that are existing types or rolling stock in operation. There is also in front of each functions an information indicating which function is mandatory and which one is optional. By optional, we mean that it's a design choice depending on, for example, the characteristic of the vehicle. If you have a diesel locomotive, you don't need to specifically ensure that the rolling stock will have all the train interface functions in relation to electrical functions, to the traction, because you have a diesel locomotive, you don't have any pantograph. And it's also depending on the installation of the TCS into the vehicle. Of course, when a function is not covered by implemented by the rolling stock, specific conditions for use shall clearly indicate which function is implemented and which is not. And finally, what we call the mandatory functions, they are mandatory to be implemented by the rolling stock. And here we are talking about, for example, braking command or some interface in relation to a TCS mode. I give you back the floor, Joao.
Many thanks, Nordine, for the clarification. Now we're going to talk a little bit about timelines and dates for different stages. For this, we'll focus on the Appendix B for the onboard and the definition of phases applicable for a project. Is it for the complete series or for each vehicle? That's a very pertinent question. The next one is which are the applicable dates for the design phase and production phases? And the next one is about the validity of the certificates. Can the NOBO issue a certificate in accordance with Regulation 2016-919 and does not have to explicitly mention Regulation 2023-1695? I'll give this question to my colleague Juan. Juan, can you please provide us a bit of guidance about these ones, please? The floor is yours.
Yes, thanks again, Joao. I think we have already our first webinar on the Appendix B and in the transition regime, but we keep receiving and we recognize that this is a complex subject and it needs time and also we are also discussing with the sector on the application guide, so we will provide soon and more clear examples. But then as a first major statement is that the CCS TSI defines the new requirement. So this is what is applicable since this is now into force. But and then the Appendix B in the CCS TSI provide the transition regimes. It means that temporarily you can use requirements from previous TSIs. So it's clear that the TSI says what you have to fulfill, what is mandatory, but it gives some transition that are especially mentioned on Appendix B. So only these cases that are mentioned in Appendix B, it can be used during the transition regime. Then regarding the definition of the phases, it's good to remind that the design phase it's more applicable at the project level for the complete project because it's related to the EC certification. This means that the design phase starts when the NOBO is contracted and it runs until the EC certificate is issued by the NOBO. But then we are getting into the production phase and in the operation phase, and these are more vehicle specific. It means that vehicles can be produced and placed onto the market while it's allowed by the third row of this table, the row of the production phase, and the operation phase is for each vehicle. This means that if you have a design and then you start building vehicles, but you are not able to produce all the vehicles in the series, but the date provided in CCS TSI Appendix B, then the latest vehicles cannot be placed into the market according to that design, and they will need to fulfill the new requirements. So it's important to make the difference between which is applicable more at project level, because the EC certificate, the type and the design examination is valid for all the vehicles, and then the production and operation is for each individual vehicles that has to be performed until specific dates. And then the dates on Appendix B, then there are some related questions also. The dates for the table B11 are for the subsystem, and then they are also applicable for the ACs with the exceptions that are included in table B3. I think we can move to the next slide for the rest of the questions. Then on the specific questions of the certificates, from the entry into force of the new TSI, all new certificates has to be issued according to this CCS TSI, because in article, I think it's article 14, it's indicated that the former TSI is repealed. Now, the already existing certificates remain valid. This is specifically mentioned in the TSI in these 2 points that you have in the slide, 72413 and 7243. This means that they remain valid unless they are required to be modified by Appendix B. This means that during the transition regime, you can still use certificates from the previous TSI. Then, if a new project wants to benefit from the transition regime and still use the requirement from the previous TSI, these certificates shall be issued according to the new TSI, but stating that requirements of the previous TSI has been used thanks to the provisions on Appendix B. And finally, and I think we have one of these questions in the chat, the CCS TSI allows to use certificates from different TSI as long as the subsystem remains compliant with the new TSI. For the onboard subsystem, this can be, for example, the SIM card. So if there are no new requirements from the SIM card in the new TSI, you can still use a SIM card certified with the previous TSI. And the role of the Novo assessing the subsystem is to ensure that even this interoperability constituent is not aligned with the latest TSI, overall the subsystem remains compliant because the requirement has not changed. So this is how the validity of the certificates can be managed in these transition regimes for the onboard. I give back the floor to you, Joao.
Many thanks, Juan. Please stay with me because the next batch of questions is also for you. Still on the Appendix B, this time for trackside. Are the definitions of 72411 also applicable to the CCS trackside subsystem? And must the CCS trackside project in an advanced stage of development demonstrate compliance with all the requirements from the CCS TSI 2023 or only with the requirements from the transition regime? Can you please give me a bit of some guidelines on this, Juan, please? The floor is yours.
Yes, Joao. It's true that the transition regime was mostly introduced and focused on the vehicles to provide a common alignment between the CCS TSI and the rolling stock TSI. So you can have a common or a complete view of the transition regime applicable for the vehicles. But in the CCS TSI, there are also provisions applicable for trackside. In that sense, the definition of the phases that we have been discussed before are only applicable for the onboard, so they are not applicable for the trackside. During the discussion of the TSI, it was difficult to find to include or to apply this principle to the trackside. So the final agreement is what is remain on the table B2 of Appendix B. And then in this table, specifically, I think it's row 1, indicates that projects in advanced stage of requirement does not need to apply the latest specifications, but just only the error correction procedure. So in that sense, if a project is already in advanced stage, they can continue and finish with the previous TSI. And then once the error correction process is applicable, then they need to analyze and to check if some errors needs to be implemented. But in general, these avoid the needs for derogations or for requests for non-application on projects which are already in advanced stage of development. And this is how the transition regime is applicable for the trackside. I hope this is clear. Back to you.
Very clear, thanks. We now jump to radio. So still for you, Juan, and we're staying on the same guidelines as before. I'll read these questions. So is the specification GSMR baseline 1 maintenance release 1 backward compatible with the previous specification for GSMR baseline 1 simply? Which transition regime from the TCS TSI table B2 is specifically applicable for GSMR? And should RMR, GSMR of FRM MCS, have a system identifier? Can you please give us clarifications, Juan?
Yes, Joao. We will cover also an important part of the CCS subsystem, which is the radio part, which is under a big evolution because we are reaching the end of life of the GSMR systems and we are preparing the future for the new FRMCS. Regarding the specific evolution on GSMR, we have developed what is called MR1, which stands for Maintenance Release 1. This means that no new functions has been introduced in relation with GSMR. So we stay with this new functionality, but what we have included are error corrections. So we have identified, and as part of the regular maintenance of the specifications that we perform as system authority, we have identified some errors together with the sector, and we have make public available the solutions. So in that sense, GSMR MR1 is backwards compatible. It's compatible with GSMR baseline 1. And then we are in the process to publish a baseline compatibility analysis. We describe under which cases the errors may affect the interoperability and they may need to be fixed. But the general question is they are compatible, and then only this error needs to be applied following the error corrections. Then in that sense, the transition regime is the one defined in general for the set of specs in Appendix B. So you can look for the onboard or for the truck side in general. But since there is general compatibility, there are not much strict requirements for the radio part. And also all set of specs from the previous TSI were already in GSMR baseline 1. So the transition regime is the same in all cases. And then regarding the third and specific questions about the system identifier, yes, it is applicable for the GSMR products. This means that they need to be defined both trackside and onboard with this definition, which provides a tool to identify it when a product is maintained, is the change that is done to the product is just on maintenance, so it's kept within the same functionality, or it has been upgraded and new functions has been introduced. So then this system identifier is split into parts, the functional identifier and the realization identifier. And then this scheme needs to be provided by the supplier. And then this is part of the characterization of all the products. So the proper judgment can be done when you get an updated product. It will be easier to identify if it's just a renewal or is an upgrade where new function has been provided. So I think with that we cover the questions that we have received in relation to the radio that were mostly about the GSMR, and I give back the floor to you, Joao.
Thank you, Juan. Don't go away, still for you. So we're now going to talk about automatic train operations. And my very first question is it possible to have an onboard in compliance with the new TSI, but without the ATO functions, and until when? The ATO trackside functionality, does it require a new authorization for the track? And is it allowed for the IAM to want to use the public 4G or 5G to communicate to the onboard? And the very last question is about grade of automation. So in ATO grade of automation 1, 2, is the Class B trackside 4G and 5G? Can you please try and answer these questions? Juan, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, Joao. ATO, as you may know, is one of the big improvements or new functionalities enhancements that has been introduced in CCS TSI 2023, and it raises questions because it's a new issue. First thing is it's important to highlight that ATO has been designed and introduced as an optional part of ERTMS. So it's the third part of ERTMS, that is ETCS, RMR, the radio part, and now ATO. But ATO has been conceived as in principle and as an optional function. So it's not needed to have it on board in all cases. But in order to benefit from the capacity improvement that ATO provides, there are some provisions that if an IM makes the effort to deploy ATO trackside, for a certain dates, the fitting of ATO will be mandatory on the onboard for newly built vehicles from a certain date. So this needs to be notified by the IM in RINF, or in the absence of RINF in the network statement, and then newly built vehicles that intend to operate on that lines shall be equipped with ATO. But in principle, ATO has been engineered and designed as the third optional part for ERTMS. Then switching to the ATO trackside questions, yes, fitting the trackside with ATO is an upgrade, is including new functions, and according to us, this will require a new authorization from the national authorities. Regarding the use of 5G or 4G, to communicate between the ATO on board and the ATO trackside, it's possible to use these networks. It's important to clarify that this is restricted to the communication between the ATO part. The communication between the ETCS part remains within GSMR. And the term Class B functionality regarding ATO makes no sense for us. What is true is that for this communication between ATO, trackside, and onboard, there are several options. There are some that are currently defined within the scope of the TSI, and some that can be defined as project-specific, as we already mentioned, 4G or 5G. If they are project-specific, all the requirement needs to be published by the IM. If the TSI so far provides the GSMR packet switch functionality as another option to use it, and then this is fully specified into the TSI, and also preparing the way for the future. The ATO trackside includes the OB app interface, which prepared it to be connected or interfaced with FRMCS. So regarding the possibilities of communication between ATO trackside and onboard, it's a GSMR packet switch. In the future, when FRMCS is fully specified and available, it will be an option, and it can be project specifics that needs to be defined by the IM and make available to the onboard. So this is what we can say about the new functionality ATO that has been recently introduced up to grade of automation 1 and 2 in this CCS TSI. Back to you, Joao.
Many thanks, Juan. Very clear. We now move a little bit to the operational aspect of these implementations, and we're going to talk a little bit about the TSI OPE Appendix A. And the very first question is about the end of authority. Are there different definitions between the CCS TSI and the OPE TSI? Very first question. The second one is about the DMI indications, so what the driver can see on the screen versus the line side marker boards. In that case, which one takes precedence? Then we need to know a bit more clarifications about the authorizations to start in staff responsible through European Instruction 7, OPE TSI Appendix A, Rule 624. And then the other one is about the OPE TSI Rule 6.44, Appendix B2, Rule 7, and the use of European Instruction 8. Quite a lot of numbers to take, but in order to answer this, I'll give the floor to my colleague, Georgios. Georgios, let's start slowly with answering the first two questions, and then we'll move on to the clarifications, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Joao. Good afternoon, everybody from my side. I will try to address these questions, which we found to be more pertinent to the activities of the operational harmonization that I am managing in the agency. The first one was about the introduction of what appeared to be a new definition of end of authority in the OPE TSI. In reality, it is not a new definition. It is an overarching definition of the existing definition of the EOA in the CCS TSI. You can see the two versions of this definition between the CCS TSI and the OPE TSI. On top it is the CCS TSI definition in subset 23, the glossary, where we define as end of authority the location to which the train is permitted to proceed and where target speed is 0. And below you will see how this term has been generalized in OPE TSI to apply in all kinds of operations, not only limited to ERTMS context. The definition there is the location up to which a train or standing composition is authorized to proceed. Why did we do this? Because we realized that there is no reason to limit the applicability of this term only to ERTMS operation. And we also identified that there is a number of benefits. However, we could not keep the exact same wording as it appears in the CCS TSI because the general operation, let's say, experts may not be familiar with the term target speed, which is a term reserved for ETCS. For that purpose, we enlarged the definition of EOA when we introduced it in the OPE TSI, but we did not cancel the one that applies for CCS TSI. Can you move to the next slide, please? So by adopting this higher level, let's say, generic definition of EOA, we designate the end location of any kind of movement authorization. We're not talking only about the movement authority of ETCS. That applies also in any operational situation, again, not only under ERTMS. And what is actually the key point here, that the new definition will apply regardless of the means used to identify this location or to indicate it to the driver. This means that it can be any of the DMI, any of the following. As examples, it is a non-exhaustive list. It can be the EOA indicated on the DMI. It can be a line sight light signal. It can be a stop or location marker that marks the EOA when no line sight signals are installed. It can be a buffer stop. It can be anything that has this operational meaning. The benefits we see by adopting a common definition of EOA in all contexts can be summarized as follows. It has been made possible to simplify operational rules that in the past needed to list what kinds of signals or indications qualify as EOAs. Now we simply say EOA. There is a similar simplification made in the European instructions. The European instructions, you may be familiar already since the 2019 OP/TSI version. It is a set of instructions that have replaced the ERTMS written orders that existed before in OP/TSI Appendix A, and now these European instructions cover in pretty much the same way like this generalization that we have introduced with EOA. They cover generic operational situations, not only limited to ERTMS operation. Of course, they also cover the ERTMS operation. Then this generalized definition of EOA is applicable to both trains and shunting oppositions, unlike the strict CCS definition, which only applies to trains. And also, last but not least, we consider that it is a good introduction of the operational people into the ERTMS context. The more ERTMS terms that are adopted for general operation, the better for the deployment and the acceptance of the ERTMS system once it is there. Next slide, please. The second topic I would like to address out of the questions is the very often raised issue of which takes precedence between the DMI indications and the line side marker boards. The high level principle is that OP/TSI Appendix A have to accommodate both, meaning both DMI indications and line side marker boards. And I will explain why there is a need to do so. First, we start by the high-level principle, which is in section 511 of this OP/TSI Appendix A, which states that the driver shall observe the displayed information on the DMI and shall react as required by this appendix. The driver may, depending on the trackside implementation, be required to take into account the harmonized marker boards defined in EN 16494, as well as other non-harmonized trackside information. So what we say here is that primarily we expect the driver to watch the DMI for relevant information, for information necessary for driving, for operating. However, we acknowledge that due to lack of harmonization of ETCS trackside engineering, the driver may be required to look out for line side marker boards. And we have some examples where this may be necessary. The most common case where the driver will have to combine DMI information with the line side information is when looking for the EOA that the driver has to respect when approaching the end of authority. In that case, due to the odometer inaccuracy, there may be a discrepancy between the EOA indicated on the DMI as end of authority and the EOA marked on the line side by means of a stop or location marker board or a light signal. This discrepancy may be higher and more, let's say, more significant if the last relevant balise group is lies at a higher distance behind the location of the EOA. In that case, the driver will be required to watch out for the physical EOA and stop at the earliest of the two EOAs, meaning the physical EOA marked by the line side marker board or signal, and the EOA, the technical EOA calculated by the onboard unit and displayed on the driver's DMI. The driver has to react in that way in order to avoid being tripped after crossing the EOA calculated by the onboard system or the physical one, which will reset the odometry and make the onboard unit realize that the train has reached the physical EOA. Another example where the line side marker boards have to be observed is when the track conditions that can normally transmit such information to the onboard system so that it is visualized on the DMI. If the track conditions are not implemented on the track side, which as we know is not mandated because there is no strict requirement for almost any track side functionality to be implemented, then if they are not implemented, the driver will have to observe the information provided through line side marker boards to be able to respond in time in functions like lowering the pantograph, raising it again, and other such closing, opening the main switch, and other track conditions that the driver has no way of seeing them through the DMI. One last example of the same need is when the level crossing function, the one that is transmitted by packet 88, is not implemented on the track side. This will require the driver to look for information about the state of a level crossing otherwise, meaning through some line side signal or through some harmonized European instruction, for which I have a separate slide at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. Now, we will tackle the topic. I have received a question about how to apply European Instruction 7 when starting a movement in SR after start of mission. In this slide, I have first a small drawing to indicate what we mean in the Rule 624 identifies two cases. The first case is when the train is standing at the ETCS stop marker, for which a set of actions apply. And the second sub-case is when the train is located away of an ETCS stop marker, for which we have the next slide. But for the time, let's stick on this. Here you see how the European Instruction 7 will look like for authorizing the train to start at the location, at the example that you see here. So we have a fictional train number, date, kilometer position, traffic, the issuing point, and then the signaler has to tick box 7 and box 710 to authorize the train to start in SR. Since the train is standing at an ETCS stop marker, the signaler also has to authorize the passing of that stop marker by ticking tick box 720 and indicating which the ID, the ID of the signal or stop marker that has to be passed through this European instruction. When we move to the next slide now, if the train is not standing at the stop marker, you can see that the same European instruction does not have to mark the 720 box. Why? Because the signaler in principle authorizes the train to start, which means that he has to tick box 7 and 710. And if the instruction is given as it is shown on the screen, the train will start from where it stands now, and it will stop at the stop marker indicated on the diagram. If the signaler, however, can already and wants already to authorize the train to pass that stop marker, and even the next one, we have given this possibility based on the sector requirements, the signaler can tick on top of 710. The signaler can also tick 720 and fill in the information, the exact ID of the stop marker that can be passed at 721 and 722 if he wishes. You can see here, for example, that we use EOA, which can be a stop marker, but it can also be a signal or any other indication that requires the train to stop. I think this clarifies the topic. We can move to the next slide. Now, I will say a few words about the use of, about passing non-protected or failed level crossings and how the provisions in Appendix, in OPE Appendix A Rule 644, Appendix B Rule 7, and Appendix C European Instruction 8 all fit together. First, the information that the driver gets about a non-protected level crossing can come either through the DMI by means of an icon or a text message, or by other means like a line side signal or a European Instruction 8. If the so-called LX function is a level crossing function is implemented on the track side, which is essentially the use of packet 88 to cover a technically protected level crossing, then ETCS onboard will supervise train movement, meaning it will provide a braking curve to the train down to a full standstill or to a sufficiently low speed defined in this packet, depending on the national rule that covers the passing of a failed level crossing. And so the driver will simply have to observe, as far as the train speed is concerned, the driver simply has to observe the supervision provided on the DMI screen. Still, the driver will have to apply the high-level requirements of OPTSI Appendix B2 Rule 7, which is the one that you see here. It has two subsections. The first one is about the absolute prohibition to pass, 7.1. But what is more relevant for us is the 7.2, which is the modalities for passing over a defective level crossing. Then you can see in this sub-rule 7.2 that in several occasions the driver is instructed to follow the instructions of the signaler. What is the way for the signaler to provide these instructions now? The only harmonized way, and we can move to the next slide. The only harmonized way for the signaler to provide formal instructions to the driver on how to pass a defective level crossing is the use of the European Instruction 8, which is specifically meant for this purpose. It is labeled Authorization to Pass Defective Level Crossings. You can see that European Instruction 8 has a lot of options and possibilities, and it has been elaborated jointly with the sector to cover all possible needs and instances where the signaler needs to advise the driver to perform a specific action when and also apply specific caution when passing a level crossing. So, for example, we have here the possibility to define an area over which the driver will consider all level crossings to be defective, if there is such an issue. In the first set of boxes, it's 840 and the area description X42 to X48. And this can also be combined with a speed restriction if the signaler wants to apply a speed restriction. And the signaler also has the possibility to indicate individual level crossings that have failed by using the fields 850 and 851, 852, etc., depending on how many level crossings the signaler wishes to indicate. So in that case, in that example that we see here, the signaler has opted to use the second option, which means to tick to indicate individual level crossings that have failed. The signaler could also, in this case, indicate a speed restriction that would apply for these level crossings by using the fields X41. And we also see that the signaler has also opted. Sorry, I will move to another screen because I don't see them. The signaler has also opted in this case to indicate a specific speed restriction when approaching these level crossings, and also to stop before crossing these two level crossings, to activate the horn, and at the end to pass the level crossings. We believe this to be a coherent approach. Hope this also addresses the question. And this is this concludes my answers. The floor is back to you, João.
Thank you so much, George, for the clarification and for the examples. We will now proceed to the error correction, but due to time limitations, I will only ask my colleague Juan to make a very quick comment about it so that we can then proceed to the live Q&A. Very, very quickly, Juan, can you just give us a little bit of an overview about the error correction procedure? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Joao. Yeah, in order to be complete in this webinar on CCS, we have received some questions on error correction procedure, but this was also one of the new elements introduced in this CCS TSI, that the request to do the analysis of the maintained specs, so the solution to the errors that have been introduced. But since this is a new process, we are finding the pragmatic way to apply it within the sector. So in order to provide a final statement and not draft answers, we have preferred also to postpone the explanations and the answers to these questions to later when we have a fully defined application guide answers. So for the moment, we acknowledge that we have received. We want not to mention that this is a relevant topic, but for the moment, we have preferred to postpone it to later time. Okay, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And then we conclude the first part of the Q&A. These were the questions that we received during the last weeks. And now we're going to try and answer the questions that are in our chat live. So just bear with me. I'll look into the chat and see the questions we have. Okay, so we have a first question, very detailed, but it's the nature of ETCS. So I'll read it very carefully, and we'll go through that question step by step. So, according to Table 6.3, for interoperability constituents that have been certified against the version of the CCS TSI, which is different from the version applied for EC verification of the subsystem, it is necessary to check that the certificate still ensures compliance with the requirements of the TSI currently in force. As support evidence, an impact analysis by comparison of specifications referenced in the TSI and certificates of the interoperability constituents must be done. If the interoperability constituents, for example, is an Excel counter certified according to the ETI 2016-911 and the new version 5 of the ERTMS 033.281.313 considers the will per as the previous versions doesn't. The impact analysis to ensure that the compliance is done with Table 6.3 may be performed by the manufacturer, or is it mandatory the modification of the SL counter IC constituent certificate by a notified body? Impact analysis must be verified by the subsystem NB. Thank you. Well, you're very welcomed, and let's try and answer that very calmly with Juan. Juan, let's try and give an answer to the friend who sent the message to us.
Okay, Joao, I will do my best. The case is proposing is that the IC already exists, and therefore we assume is already certified, but is still good, even if it's certified against a previous TSI, to fulfill the requirements of a subsystem that is certified against the new TSI. We have the example of the Excel counter, but maybe another trackside example could be the balises. If the balises from the previous TSI that we have not introduced major changes, that is still fit for purpose with the new TSI, with the same certificate, they can be used. But regarding the specific question, who has to assess this, is the NOVO that is assessing the overall subsystem that needs to ensure that if elements or IC certified against previous TSI are still good to ensure that the subsystem fulfills the requirements of the new TSI. So the answer is that is the subsystem NOVO is the one that is required to ensure this overall consistency. I hope that this is clear to you. Okay, thanks, Joao.
Very clear, and thank you for clarifying that for me. But stay online. I'll throw the next one to you as well. The Annex A does no longer define different sets of specifications. It is though referred to Annex A in Table 7.1, basic design characteristics. How can I interpret the first row in the table in the category changes impacting the BDC outside the acceptable range of parameters? Use another Appendix A set of specifications? It's a very good question. Juan, what can we say about this one? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, Joao, it's true that it's a very relevant question, and I will try to explain. This is mostly due to transition regime or transition period. In the new TSI, as it was pointed out, we have cleaned up or removed the former set of specs, and we just, because they were not up to date, they have known errors that has been solved. So we have moved from the concept previously of set of specs to the concept of to have only one set of specs with no errors or known errors. And then this BDC, this basic design characteristic in the table, was kept to be used during the transition phase with several set of specs can be still used. And also this table is also applicable for vehicles already existing. So when they move from previous set of specs to the new baseline 4, the one that is in CCS 2023, then there is also a change. What it means that if a new functionality is added or the functionality is changed between the set of specs, a new authorization it's required. But then regarding the changes in the set of specs, what sorry, I missed the point I want to make, but 1 second. Yeah, that the point I want to make is that we are moving from the concept of set of specs of previous baseline, because we used to have baseline 3 MR1, baseline 3 release 2. Now we have baseline 4 release 1. That we are now moving to the concept of system version, which is the highest supported system version by on board, or which is the system version that is implemented trackside. So in order to make this transition from the previous scheme to the new scheme, we need to keep this BDC. But basically, it says that if you are getting to a higher functionality, then you need to get an authorization, and this row in the table is kept for the transition regime. Sorry for the small doubt, but I was trying to make up my mind. Back to you, Joao.
No problem, totally clear. And I will take your harm again, because I think the next question might be needing some clarification from your side, but I'll read it. In an onboard CCS subsystem, is it possible to implement the train protection part, ETCS onboard, with baseline 3, if the transition regime can be applied, and the onboard ATO part with baseline 4? According to point 6.6.41 of the TSI, an EC verification certificate must cover the parts of train protection, data radio communication, and automatic train operation. Is it possible certification with a mix of baselines for each part in the same EC verification? I would say no, but I will rely on a more complete answer from Juan. Juan, what we say about this one?
Yeah, you are fully right, Joao. I think this is not possible in the specific case of ATO and ETCS baseline 3, because for the introduction of ATO, new interfaces, not only the technical interfaces to connect the ETCS with the ATO part or through the Ethernet bus, but also the interfaces to the driver, the icons of the DMI, the new mode on ETCS. These require the ETCS to be at least compliant with baseline 4 release 1. There are two options in relation with the question that was placed before, that in baseline 4 release 1, there are two possibilities there are three, in fact, but regarding ATO, there are only two. The onboard can be developed supporting up to system version 3.0 or up to system version 2.2, which is the lowest version that supports ATO. So the answer in this case is that in order to have the correct working and interfacing between all the parts, the minimum ETCS required is baseline 4 release 1. Back to you.
And again, once more, thank you for the very thorough explanation. I will proceed to the next question. You have indicated that the definitions of 7.2.4.1.1 are not applicable for trackside. So how notified bodies can justify that they have realized their evaluation on the previous TSI, but deliver a certificate with TSI 2023 on a project ended in 2024? Is there an equivalent for trackside of initial assessment framework and certification framework? We didn't find any definitions for the trackside. Juan, what can we say about this one?
Yes, it is true, Joao, that as explained also in the previous slide, it's very difficult to define this for the trackside, because it's not. We have made some efforts during the working groups, but it's true that the definitions are not fit for purpose for trackside. So in this case, if a project, it can be applied for such cases is what I mentioned, that in the table B2, it is indicated that projects in advance of a stage can be still finished. So even if you are using TSI 2023, thanks to the provision in the table B2 row 1, the set of specs from the previous TSI can still be applied. So I think it's not needed that the initial and the final certification framework is formally defined for the trackside, but the Appendix B table with row 1, it's covering it, and this is referred in section 7.4. No, sorry, no, I don't have the section reference, but there is a section about the validity of the trackside certificates and the applicability of the Appendix B sections. It's true that this can be further clarified in the application guide, but we consider it was not needed to have it defined. Back to you.
Many thanks for the clarification. I will now go to the next one, which is European instructions 1 and 7 offer the possibility to authorize train movements in a procedural way, including the indication of the end of authority at a certain location, field 115.1/1, 115.2. The end of such an authorization is also considered as an end of authority in the context of the TSI OPE 2023. While an end of authority corresponding to a Class B signal at stop aspect does match the CCS TSI definition, as the stop indication is also presented via cap signaling, this procedural meaning of an AOA does not match the definition in the CCS TSI. In fact, it is no longer possible to allow passing an end of authority EI01 as the EOA has moved at the moment the EI01 has been received. Should the end of authority be interpreted as the location up to which a train or a shunting composition is authorized to proceed as indicated by the signaling system? This is right down your avenue, George. Can you please take the floor and answer this one, please?
Thank you, Joao. I have to say I'm not sure I understand the question fully because to my eyes there is a small contradiction already in the document. However, let's say the coexistence of Class B and Class A indications that have to be ignored by the driver in case the driver is driving on the other system has to be managed very, very carefully. If an EOA only applies for Class B operation, whereas for Class A operation it can be ignored, and vice versa, is a very delicate topic. And it is obviously not easy to harmonize or to advise in general ways how to deal with it. However, the final question, I can already say that I do not agree that the definition should be limited to the signaling system because this defeats the purpose, the exact purpose that we wanted to achieve by extending the scope of the definition of EOA to cover also any even non-technical ways of indicating the end of authorization up to which the train can proceed. So the answer is no. It cannot be limited to indications of the signaling system. The floor is back, Joao.
Many thanks. The next question is quite large, so it's in the chat. I will not read it all. I will just read some parts of it because then we will not have time to try and answer all of them, but I'll do my best. So I'll start with 4.2.2 onboard ETCS functionality locating the train in a coordinate system based on Eurobalese locations. Question. This specification describes a functionality of level 2. Does this mean the vehicles have to mandatorily implement level 2? The radio data transmission, see point 4251 RMR ACAP interface, point 4262 interface between RMR data communication and ETCS ATO applications and key management. This radio data system is optional unless operating in ETCS level 2, formerly ETCS level 2 or 3 line. Question. In this specification, a functionality of level 2 is obviously not mandatory, only if the vehicles use tracks with level 2. Does this mean that the vehicles do not mandatorily have to implement level 2? For the 2 or 3 trackside ETCS functionality. The main functionalities are locating a train at a specific train coordination system for ETCS level 2. Question. Since this defines a functionality of level 2, does this mean that level 2 is mandatory for the tracks, or does it apply only in case if level 2 is implemented? Therefore, if only level 1 is implemented, it would not apply. I'm going to break here the question now and try and see if we can answer the first parts of it, because it's going to be a very large question. And then if anything, we can try and answer that offline separately. But I'll give the floor to Juan. Juan, let's try and answer this question step by step, and you can take the floor now, please.
Okay, Joao. Yes, it's a quite long question, but then I think overall, I think that the regarding the location in coordinate system is used by also in level 1. So the train needs to know in which direction it's traveling and how long has traveled from the previous balise group. Then in the same way, I think I'm trying to answer to the complete questions. Data transmission from balises is also used both in level 1 and level 2. So the TCS on board unit read the balises in both levels. So the fact that the radio 2 is a radio base also does not prevent that the train must read some balises from trackside. So it's balises are used in both levels. Also regarding the optional fitting, I think what is optional is the fitting of the data communication part, the ETCS data only radio. And then if the vehicle is not going to operate in level 2 lines, this can be not equipped, but the TCS on board has to be functionally complete. We have addressed that already before. So they can be prepared in the future if the owner of the vehicle change his mind and decide to go to level 2, only the fitment of the ETCS data only radio is needed. So all the functionalities on the onboard are mandatory, and this is requested because the TSI refers to the SRS, and the SRS has the complete information. So if a ETCS onboard unit has to fulfill the SRS, this is in table A2 of CCS TSI, includes all levels. And then regarding the mandatory for level 2 on trackside is not mandatory, it's an option for the IM. So the IM can decide to implement level 1 or level 2, and now with the new definition of level 2 with train integrity or without train integrity. I think it was a quite complex question, so I hope we have addressed the main points. But okay, I think we can move to the next one. Back to you, Joao.
Yes, thank you, Juan. For the sake of time, let's try and answer all the other questions that are here on the chat as well. So I have the next one, which is about transition regime. Transition regime in table B11 for production phase. Set of specifications 3 is allowed until 2032, but system version 2.1 set of specifications 3 maintenance package seems to be allowed until 2030 only. Can you please clarify? Juan, please take the floor to answer this question.
Thanks, Joao. I think it's. I don't see where it is referring to the discrepancy. I think in the table B11 for the set 3, there are two different deadlines. One is for producing the EC certificate, which is 2030, and then once you have these certificates, vehicles can be produced until 2032. So this is for newly built vehicles. So I think I don't see any discrepancy because this is in row 10 and is the only row which is referring to the possibility of using set 3. There is another row, I think it's row 5, when it's referring to the possibility of using system 2.0 and then the need to move to system version 2.1. And it's true that in that case, the deadlines are up to 2030. But I think maybe if you see any discrepancy, please inform us more specifically and with more details when where this. But in principle, the only row in table B11 is row 10, which define the difference between the obtaining the EC certificates, which is 2030, and the possibility to place vehicles onto the market, that is 2032. Back to you, Joao.
Many thanks. Another question for you, Juan. Is it possible to implement the baseline pre-release to system with TO 2017, not having TO 2020 yet, during the transition period? If we understand correctly, the TO is not mandatory unless the IM has notified them in RINF. Juan, can you please give a quick and short answer to this?
Yes, Joao. I think as I said at the end of the prepared presentation, these technical opinions has been superseded now by the error correction procedure. We are in the transition phase to this new approach. So in principle, the set of specs number 3 and number 2 that can be implemented according to the previous TSI. Then, when the complete process for error correction has been executed or analyzed by the IM, then the necessary and applicable error corrections will be published in RINF. But then, in any case, that should be an assessment, and we highly recommend to use all the available information, which is the latest one is the technical opinion, the opinion 2020/2. And until we have the full BCA and all the information available to the IM, and this is published in RINF, yes, set specification number 3 can be still implemented, but in any case, the error correction procedure will be applicable for all vehicles, even those that are in operation. So sooner or later, this process for error corrections to ensure the proper maintenance and the proper operation without the impact of the known errors of the system will be needed to be applied to all vehicles, independently when they have been placed on the market. Back to you, Joao.
Many thanks, Juan. We have time for only one more question, which I'll very quickly read. Which ETCS levels are mandatory, and where do I find this in the TSI? I'll answer the first part of that question. So the ETCS on board shall implement both level 1 and 2. The ETCS trackside may implement level 1, level 2, or both. Now, where we can find that on the CCS TSI, I will quickly ask Juan to tell us, and then we'll wrap up. Juan, can you just tell us a bit more? The floor is yours.
Yes, Joao. Regarding which is the mandatory requirements for the ETCS onboard part, I think in chapter 4, I don't know by heart the specific number, but I guess it's 422 or around it, is defined which is the applicable specifications and the applicable requirement for the onboard. These sections will refer to table A2 and more specifically to index 4, which is the system requirement specifications, and then this is included that the onboard has to fulfill all of these requirements, which include, as you have indicated, both level 1 and level 2. So this is how it is reflected on the CCS TSI. And then, as I also introduced before, in section 2.3 is defined trackside applicable levels. So the meaning of levels and the options are for the trackside, are for the onboard. The options are if equipped with the data communication part with the ETOR, the ETCS data only radio, or if equipped or not with the train integrity module. But the functionality which is supporting this must be in all cases inside the onboard equipment. Thanks, Joao.
Many thanks for this, Juan. I'm afraid we have no more time. There are more questions still coming, but please have a look at the chat as our colleagues are working in parallel to try and answer your questions. So you might find your question being answered not orally, but actually written on the chat, and we'll try our best to accommodate that. Please provide feedback. If you feel that you have more questions and you need more sessions of this, we're quite happy to organize those in the future. But in the meantime, I will wrap up this part with my colleagues. I'll thank them, and I'll give the floor back to my colleague Cyrielle, who is going to do a little bit of the final speech and end our webinar for today. Cyrielle, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joao. Indeed, we are now reaching the end of this fourth and last Q&A session, and incidentally, the last webinar of the year. Thank you for your participation. I would also like to thank warmly today's speakers, Juan, Georgios, Nordin, Joao. Thank you very, very much for your support, for your work, dedication in preparing for this event. In the backstage, this is important, I would also like to thank Christian Clecha, Begonia Domingo, David Cuesta Gomez, and Juan Archanco for your support. Dear attendees, we really hope that you enjoyed this Q&A session as well as the 3 previous ones. You can send your feedback as usual in this session via the QR code you're seeing right now on the screen. And we look forward to meeting you again at one of our upcoming events. So first, be informed that next week on the 12th of December in the ERA's headquarters in Valenciennes, the agency is organizing a safety leadership training. So this training is now complete, it's now full, but we can already announce that a similar training is scheduled for the 27th of February 2024. So if you want to register to that one, all you must do is to go to the agency's website where you will find all the necessary information. You can also register for the upcoming Safety Culture Oversight training that will also take place in Valenciennes on the 23rd and 24th of January 2024. Then at the end of January and beginning of February, another round of organizational just culture training will take place remotely, but you also have to register via our website. Another topic that may interest your younger relatives or acquaintances, we are pleased to announce that the agency has just opened a call for interest regarding traineeships. We are welcoming newly qualified graduates who are willing to get acquainted with and contribute to its everyday work. So who can apply? What do we offer? How to apply? If you're interested, all the information is in our website. Please note that this call is open until the 15th of January, 2024. Finally, an important information, the agency would like to inform its partners of its upcoming closure dates, especially the upcoming ones from the 25th of December to the 2nd of January 2024. Applicants are kindly invited to consider these dates when submitting their applications, as they have an impact on the starting date of the assessments. Having said that, if you would like to stay updated on our activities, you can always check our website and sign into our database. And you can also follow us whenever you want on our social media accounts, X and LinkedIn. As for me, on behalf of the agency, I simply want to wish you a wonderful holiday season. I look forward to meeting you again next year, right here for more webinar or Q&A sessions, the dates of which will be announced as soon as possible. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.